I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Carole Kravetz Aykanian, one of the editors of Apple TV Plus's The Morning Show. So, Carole, you edited 4 episodes in season one, then didn't edit any in season two, and have now returned for the third season, in which you edited three, including the very first one. So, to start things off, I'd just be very interested to hear from you what that experience was like diving back into the world of The Morning Show after this hiatus.
Oh, that's delicious. I mean, it's a show that I've really enjoyed working on. Season one, it was a very dear season to me, just because of the subject matter. The Me Too movement. There were some really very profound themes that touched me, and the collaboration with everyone was just wonderful with Mimi in particular, obviously Mimi Leder. And I couldn't do season two, and it was COVID. There were a lot of reasons. We stopped and I went on to something. Anyway, I wasn't available anymore. But so happy to be back on season three. Very exciting to go back into the world and reconnect with the characters I know and some new ones. So
absolutely. And that's a perfect segue to my next question, because the premiere takes place, roughly 2 years after the events of the season two finale. And not only do you have to bring us up to speed to where all our familiar characters are in 2022, but you also have to introduce us to new ones, including Chris and Paul, of course. So how did you balance all these different elements while ensuring that the episode didn't become disjointed in the process, if that makes sense?
Yeah, episode one of any new season is always a challenge, because sort of like you have to pick up where you left at, but especially it's even more of a challenge when you jump, as you said, you jump so much and so much has happened.
Yes.
And you have to sort of like go on with a new story while you establish where everyone is. And there were so many unfinished stories, cliffhangers from season two to go to season three. What happened between Bradley and Corey, and Jennifer being so sick, and so many other stories that we had to sort of mix the catching up and sort of establish in an elegant way that wasn't so that was an elegant way of sort of catching up with our characters while moving forward with a story and introducing all the new ones. How do we do that? I mean, it's it's a little hard. I mean, obviously there was a really great script, to begin with. Very ambitious, I have to say, with not only the catching up and establishing new story, but launching a rocket, in episode one. So it was complicated. We worked on it for a long time, trying to figure out the best way to introduce things clearly but quickly, then catching up, keeping up with the humor while we are like bringing all these new characters and all these new story, and also be clear enough so we don't lose anyone on the way.
Yeah. And you mentioned the rocket and the space sequence. That's something we'll talk about in just a second. But I actually want to go back to what you said before that, because there is indeed so much that has happened to and between these characters between 2020 and 2022. And we don't actually learn what happened straight away. It sort of is sort of sprinkled in throughout the third season. So I guess my question is, how much information did you have about what had happened to all these characters in that time frame when you edited the first episode? And how does that information then influence how you cut certain scenes, like scenes between Bradley and Corey, or scenes between Bradley and Laura, given what these characters went through between 2020 and 2022?
Sure. So, for example, I will take the Bradley Corey and whatever is, the secret between them. So we don't know what happened, and I'll tell you specifically about their relationship, because we left off and we don't know what happened between them. And so you have to catch up with that story. What happened? Are they together? I mean, he said, he's in love with her. So what happened in terms of their personal life? So you have to catch up, and we see that they're not together pretty quickly. And then we realize that they are talking about something when he tells her that actor Alex Levy has disappeared and is not going to go up in the rocket anymore. Mm-hmm. He needs her to jump in. And when she's like, sort of, that she owes him something. Mm-hmm. And so there is a secret there. There's something that has happened. But what I was very aware of, I didn't want people to think that it was something that they had already seen in season 2, and that they would have to like try to make the mental work to go, wait a second, because it's something else that happened in between the season. So that was a real challenge to figure out how we're not going to confuse the audience with something. Obviously, there is something new because it's a new plot, but it has nothing to do with their love relationship from season 2. So that's the kind of challenge that we had in the cutting. And we, specifically for that, we came up with the idea of cutting to very quick flashbacks, to kind of like visual flashbacks in that scene, to kind of say, well, it has nothing to do with their love life at all. It's something else. And I think it was important to be clear about it, as clear as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that distinction that you mentioned there, to show that it's not something that we had already seen, but something that really happens in this time frame that we haven't seen. I think that's really interesting and not something I thought about. And I do think that the flashbacks are these very brief flashbacks, like memory flashes. I think they're very helpful in that regard.
Yeah. So this is a kind of like challenge that you encounter when you have to sort of like jump 2 years.
Right.
And then you want to establish certain things, but you don't want to confuse the audience either with things that happened the season before. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you mentioned, at the end of the episode, they go to space. And we have this really great space sequence. And I think it's safe to say it's one of the craziest things the show has almost done. But at the same time, what really struck me is how emotional the scene actually was, especially once they get to space. And I mean, you have that moment of Bradley looking out into space and starting to get teary-eyed. So talk a bit about the process of putting this scene together and what really the subtext of that scene is, because like I said, it's so affecting.
Yes. So obviously they didn't go into space. So in terms of the mechanics of it, it was an incredible challenge for the director, visual effects, us, to try to like create that moment that, came out of nowhere. And them in zero gravity was, it's amazing what we can do today and how we did it. And it just, I'm still like, can't believe it works, what made it happen. The idea that space, like that travel into space, looking at the planet, would create such emotion, that's something that Mimi really wanted to explore with the Bradley character. And so when we cut to her, unexpectedly, all these emotions come to life to her, and she's overwhelmed by this feeling of sadness and emptiness, loneliness, and all at the same time. And it's almost like a sort of spiritual experience up there.
Yes, absolutely.
And we sort of continued exploring this feeling of magic, or not magic, but they float in the air and there's this zero gravity, and we decided to do it sort of completely outside of reality, with the opera. And so it becomes this sort of suspended moment where everyone is just in such awe of what they managed to technically and whatever, what they really managed to make happen, and only to be broken by the reality that all of a sudden the connection drops and they disappear from the screen, and who knows what happened to them.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned about it sort of being a spiritual experience is really, really interesting. And if you think about Bradley, that's another scene that when you go back to the episode, once you know what has happened to her in the 2 years that we haven't seen, I think the scene makes even more sense. And I think also this idea of isolation is really interesting because I talked to the production designer Nelson Coates last week, and he talked about
Yes.
how isolation and loneliness is really a theme that he wanted to inject into the design of her apartment that she has in season 3. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned it in this regard as well. Um, yeah, and I do want to jump ahead then to the 6th episode, which you co-edited with Andrew Gust, and I'm just going to jump right ahead to the sequence of the episode, which is this intense interview between Alex and Paul. And I have to assume that you had a lot of footage for this scene. There seem to have been a lot of cameras in place. So when you have that much footage and so many options to choose from, how do you make sure when to use a close-up versus a wide shot, when to cut to a reaction shot, or when to linger on someone's face? So how do you go about making all of these decisions?
Well, editing is about layers. It's like a painting or a sculpture. You go back at it, you go back at it, you go. The first pass that an editors do on a scene is you just use my intuition. That's what we use. We sort of let the footage speak to you. So that first pass is usually the hardest pass, but it's the pass where you start to learn about what exists and you sort of try to get your feeling about the scene and sort of make it your own. And so then starting from that first pass, then you start to analyze,
Right.
what are the key moments? What are you trying to build to? Okay. And in this case, there were like different moments. There were like moments where Jennifer was like pushing him. And then there were moments when you feel like, oh my God, she's got the upper hand,
Right.
So we had to like build to that moment and you feel, oh, she's got, and then he manages to turn the story completely and is very good at it. And he turns the story onto him and sort of gives a very emotional response about his marriage and the way he used to, relate to people or use people and that he wants to change anyway. So you have to find those key moments that you need to achieve and you need to build to them. It's sort of like music or choreography and so a lot of trial and errors. You try the close up and then you realize maybe that's interesting if we see them both. Right. And you just realize that maybe there's a shot that is wider where the two of them have this incredible exchange in terms of, because it's also based on choosing the right performance and
Right.
Every take is different. So you have to find the moments, the sort of magical moments in each, in the performance in each angle. So, and there are also sometimes, most of the time it's the performance that lead you.
Right.
Sometimes it's also the shots, that Mimi had shot some interesting back and forth for a certain moment in the discussion that really worked well with the sort of back and forth, not competition, but sort of like, the fact that they were butting heads and
Right.
so they were so it's a combination of the performance, the angles, how you build the rhythm, because it's a very long scene.
Yes.
So you have to find the way that it will evolve and that you'll feel like you're always going forward and not settle, but that we, the editor, the storytellers, are leading the audience and it's going to build to the end, and so it takes a lot of time and layers and a lot of trial and errors.
I can absolutely imagine. I mean, the tension in that scene is immaculate. And what is also interesting is that you have these reaction shots from Chip, who obviously
Yes.
there's a jealousy brewing inside of him as he's seeing these two interact. So how did you ensure that when you sprinkled in some of these reaction shots from him, that it didn't sort of disrupt the tension that you were already building between Paul and Alex?
Again, it's you sort of find the moments that are funny, interesting in Mark Duplass's performance. And God knows he's so good. There were so many of them, and once you figured out where they could go, because sometimes they don't go exactly for the line, but they go, you know, you kind of manipulate them, and they are better for a different moment. But once you figure out which one are the best, then you start to like put it in context with what's going on in the scene and the dialogue, and you see if it bounces. Does it take away too much from the tension, or does it add to the tension? And the tone of this show is very complicated because there is a lot of humor, but there's a lot of drama. And I think that the main goal that we always had, for me, was to keep it real as much as possible, because not to go into sort of big comedic moment, but honor the humor, and whenever you can, let it play. And so it's experimenting, you know, you see. And in the beginning, I had him a little bit more.
Interesting.
Sort of like a few more times. And then as we looked at it with, you know, Charlotte Stout and Mimi and, you know, and Andrew. And so we decided that maybe we take a little bit out, you know, it's sort of, you look at it and because you don't want to overdo it, it has to still be natural and compelling. And so again, trying, experimenting, looking at it as a scene, and then looking at it as in the whole episode. So
yeah,
it's a lot of watching it again and again and again.
Yeah, and it's really just such an intense sequence. And, you know, to stay on the word intense, I do want to talk about the finale, which you co-edited with Plummy Tucker. And what really stands out about this finale, obviously, is that it's very intense. It builds and it builds and it builds, and it reaches its climax in the boardroom scene where the Hyperion UVA deal is supposed to come to a vote. And, you know, having edited the season 1 finale, I think you know a thing or two about building tension, but the stakes in this finale are just very different. So walk me through the process of building up to that climactic boardroom scene in the finale.
So, yes, the boardroom is climactic, and whatever happens after still is.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But what happened after it continues pretty much until the resolution of until the real breakup between between Alex and Paul. Yes. You have all the elements sort of starting to build, you know, it's like Lego, they built, and one of the elements was that Alex was trying to get, we don't really know exactly what she's doing, but she went to see Laura to discuss with her some kind of plan. And you don't really know what it is, but there is the scene the night before the boardroom that she gets the text that everything is okay, and you don't really know what's going on, but you know something is about to explode. And so the idea was to sort of like build the tension and continue it all the way. So so we sort of like built the mystery, and once that was set up, then the new morning was coming, and this big classical piece of music carried us through Alex's arrival, John Hamm welcoming her, the boardroom, you know, everybody there, and all the tension of her walking and facing the board and having to say, well, I'm proposing something else. So we try to build suspense, and then we sort of delivered everything with this big piece of classical music. If that answers. And then obviously after that is the consequences of that scene, of that scene, and all the scenes with Stella and you know, in the control room, and between Alex and Paul.
Yes. And like you said, you know, Alex and Paul, that's really the climax, where the climaxing kind of ends. And what is interesting is that after that climax, there's actually a 2-week time jump. And that's when the episode, like, really, it starts to calm down in a way. And again, what really struck me about the final 10 to 15 minutes is how emotional they are. You have Bradley saying goodbye to Corey. You have Alex accompanying Bradley to the FBI, where she then turns herself in alongside her brother. So I guess on a final note, talk about putting those last 10 to 15 minutes together and really foregrounding the emotional heft of what happens in them.
Yeah. We were a little concerned about this whole end, these 2 weeks later, because we had a lot of scenes, and sometimes once the drama has unfolded, you usually have one scene for epilogue, but we had a lot of scenes and a lot of travel to do, and we were a little bit concerned about how long we could be, and we tried different structure, we tried different ways to tell that part of a story, and we pretty much ended up sort of like, it was it the way, but we ended up finding the structure. When we found the structure, then we could figure out how much time we could spend. The reality is that the performances are just so unbelievable, and you're so attached to the character. Like the characters, like the Bradley and Corey scene in the hallway is so strong, that I think you could just watch them and stay with them for not ever, but for a long time. And that's what we realize, that if maybe structurally it's kind of strange to have so much time, that still so much story to go through, the performances and the investment that the audience has in the characters, that's what will bring you through all the way to the end and deliver. But I think the ending is really beautiful. And when Bradley walks in slow motion, she's going to surrender herself with her brother. It really, like, it's such a big arc for her. This season, and what she decides to do, the truth teller, as she's been called, since season 1. That you just, I think she really carries the weight of that decision she makes, and what it implies for her future as a journalist, pretty much.
And what you mentioned, those final 2 shots, I mean, you see that shot of Bradley walking into the FBI, and then you see Alex walking away, and then you have a version of 3 little birds playing over the scene, and the slow motion, the way it all comes together. I was, like I said, I thought it was a very emotional ending to the season, a very somber ending, something I didn't expect at all, and I was really surprised by how it affected me. So I really loved that.
Yeah, thank you. That song was, it was really a great find. Originally we had thought that maybe we would open with that song, a different version, when she's a child, and close it. We tried a lot of things, and in the end that version stayed in the end. But we thought maybe book ending could be interesting. See, you try so many things, and then you find the perfect, or the sort of the closest to perfect version. I'm very proud of the ending. I think it's just really, as long as it moves you, that's what it's important, and makes you sort of long for the next season.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a perfect note for us to end on. We're unfortunately out of time, but thank you so much for walking me through your process, and congratulations on the 3rd season of The Morning Show, Carole.
Thank you so much. Thank you.